So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this one was given to me by Eclipse 2500, and it feels like it's been a little while actually since I got something from Eclipse, but I think that's maybe just because of the way that I record things in bulk, so it can seem a little while longer when I go for a whole recording cycle without getting at least something from Eclipse. But I actually have two battles from him, this being the first, this being more of an open field battle, albeit it's on a map we've never seen before in fact, and there's plenty of interesting terrain features as well for both sides to have to contend with. And the other one, which will be coming up probably immediately after this one, is going to be in a mountain fort. So two very different kinds of custom scenarios here that we can work with, and it is going to be good versus evil as well, which is probably the first battle in quite a while honestly I've done which has had this particular theme in it, so that's something to be thankful for as well. Seeing as it's a field battle, we can actually start by default with the player who sent me the battle replay, which was of course Eclipse himself, who's going to be marching with the forces of evil today, and he's going to be playing as Angmar, which are a very effective faction, albeit under normal circumstances we see them in siege battles where they're on the attack. They can afford to be extremely gung-ho because of the numbers advantage that the attackers very often have, and the fact that Angmar are very much built around exploiting that fact, especially with some of their more tanky units of infantry. It's not quite so simple for them to do so on the open field, but it's still certainly their modus operandi to try and overwhelm their opponents through a mix of heavy aggression and mostly survivable units. But the Angmar halberds get their survivability from the range of their weapon, of course, and even then, they're certainly among the more fragile of the Angmarin units. But the armour piercing will be useful. They're up against 4 factions of Western humans today, and all of those factions are going to have some sort of reliance on armour, so if the halberds can get into formation and get those halberds pointing in the right direction, they can certainly be a very efficient unit, and they're also very numerous of course, so to chew your way through all of them is fairly difficult, but we shall see how effective they can be. Backed up by some standard Guardians of Kharndoom with the rusted armour, this time without the upgrades as it were, but no unit really typifies what Angmar are all about more than this one. They're numerous, they're clad in heavy armour, they don't necessarily do damage all that quickly, but they survive long enough, and there's enough of them to the point where they tend to just wear you down, and that can be could be a bit of a problem considering they're going up against Dale today. I mean, Dale have got plenty in the way of missiles that they can use, but of course the Guardians of Kharndoom are pretty much tailor-made as a mainline line infantry unit for dealing with that sort of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how this matchup plays out, because Dale will want to keep Angmar at arm's length for as long as possible, but Angmar have got all of the ability to absorb the punishment they can dish out. Good and Bad Guard are kind of similar in many ways, only they're obviously spears, so they're not going to be quite as effective in melee. They are a little bit cheaper per unit, and of course they do come with that anti-cavalry bonus as well, which could be useful given the density of Arthedain armies on the field today. There's also some cavalry for Angmar. Angmar's cavalry can be a surprisingly useful supporting tool, especially with the walk skirmishers. They do have an anti-cavalry bonus in melee, as well as of course armour-piercing projectiles at range. They do have all the standard walk weaknesses in that their melee defense is pretty poor, so if they do come up against a really strong cavalry unit they can die off pretty quickly, especially if they take a charge first, and obviously their armour values are low enough to the point where missiles can be a real problem, but as a supporting unit, like I said, they can still be very, very useful indeed. Guardians of Kharndoom back here, not too surprising to see Angmar investing pretty heavily in Trolls as well. Trolls of Angmar, very, very damaging if they can get committed at the right time. The damage spike they offer is actually very important to Angmar, otherwise they can be a little bit too focused on their survivability overall. Hammerguard are another example of a unit which certainly have got damage dealing capabilities to make their faction keep pace overall in damage dealing terms. Which are on pikemen at the back. If they come forward in a final wave and the red team have got nothing that can answer this, they could be in real trouble. Obviously they're pretty tanky for pikemen as well given their armor values. We also have some witches. On an open field they can be much more difficult to use, especially if, considering all of the red team factions today have got those archers at the ready. The witches, as long as the red team are on the lookout for them, they could be utterly harmless. We'll have to wait and see. Witch Realm Inquisitors here as well, a very, very dangerous unit of cavalry. In fact, I think based on all of the factions on display today, in terms of melee cavalry, this is the strongest possible one that can be fielded. So that gives Angmar a certain edge as well, and some Snaga Stalkers guarding at the flank. Now then, moving on to the second army, his immediate ally is going to be Lango, who's playing as Harad, certainly less in terms of survivability, but certainly plenty in terms of damage. The Black Serpents, for example, in comparison to the Witch Realm Inquisitors, who are entirely defensive really and about attacking Other cavalry melee, the Black Serpents are lancers, so they'll be hoping to get some good charges into blocks of enemy infantry. Haradrim archers and Southrons here in the middle. I don't know if there's Southron archers in and amongst them. That looks like warband. I mean, these kind of units are going to struggle if the battle is kept at long range for long periods of time. I mean, they do have a ballista here, so they could make life a little bit more awkward over on the other side of these hills here for the forces of good, but I'm not sure. I don't think Harad will want this to turn into a battle of attrition at range, because it's not really their MO. We've got some Trolls of Harad back here. I mean, what is their MO is dishing out a lot of damage, specifically armor-piercing damage, in close range combat, both with javelins and with infantry. And the Trollmen are pretty much typifying that, obviously, a really good unit of multiple HP shock infantry. Not much armour, but nothing in Harad really does have that much armour. Muhard Berserkers here as well, offering a lower tier but still armour-piercing option. Looks like 2 units of Demons of the Desert here. Isn't that 2? No, it's just 1. There's just a gap here, I was going to say. 1 unit of Demons of the Desert. They can be just as devastating as the Witchram Inquisitors, but a little bit more difficult to use. They're not as vulnerable, though, as the Witchers, I should say, not Witchram Inquisitors. Beast Hunters, not too surprising to see Harad go this heavily into Javelins. Like I said, it's a real strength of the faction. More of those units over there. Champions of Nafarat. Very scary armor-piercing shock infantry. And Mumakil. I mean, Mumakil, we've seen them be very effective in the past, but they are difficult to use, so it's a big gamble to bring them, but if it pays off, could be the sort of thing to give the blue team the momentum they need to go onwards towards victory. We have Windy, which is good to see him ashore for once, and he's playing as Umbar, rather fittingly. Got some Belagire archers and some Balakith marksmen here on the front line. Do the Balakith marksmen have an armour upgrade? They do. So he's clearly hoping that he can dominate in the long-range skirmish, which is easier said than done against a faction like Arthedain, but Umbar certainly have the resources to be able to do so. More Haradrim over there. We've got Belagire footmen in behind. Belagire pikes, it looks as though they do have the armour upgrade, so they are going to be just that little bit tankier. A cheap and cheerful front line from Umbar for once, at least initially with the spears and the pikes, but then in behind, unsurprisingly, we are going to see more in the way of heavier infantry. Narin Aro Royal Guard, Arthedain Shield Guard, Harbingers of Castamere, a very strong unit of heavy swordsmen. Not too surprising actually to see the Balakith Shield Bearers instead of the Alcaron Legion. If you want to save a little bit of money, the Shield Bearers are cheaper, and if you're going up against an armoured faction, they can be just as effective, really. Their melee defense is a little bit lower, which might cost them. Balakith Axe Guard for even more of an armour-piercing edge. And Cavalry, both units of high-tier cavalry. Very expensive, this, but Warlords of Umbar, as I learned recently, are much better than I thought they were in and amongst the other Lance Knights. And the Alcarondas Faithful, much like the Witchram Inquisitors, will give the blue team, I should say, a real edge in that melee cavalry combat. And finally, WK, unsurprisingly, playing as his beloved Harad. We've got some Southron Warband, Muhard Beast Hunters in behind, some Southron Pikes, dismounted Serpent Guard, so he's gone for some Serpent Guard. Maybe a little bit more of a balanced approach, this. Trollmen here, Champions of Nafarat, I say that actually, there's some really high tier stuff back here. Demons, but based on the way he's set up, I imagine he's going to move forward pretty quickly, and that's not too surprising given the fact that both he and his Arthedainian opponent over here, unlike in pretty much every other instance on the battlefield, where it's both of them start with a hill, these two have to contend for the initial hill. So that's rather clever map design, intentional or no. And speaking of which, it is Sin of the Dark Cloud who's playing as Numenor over on this side, in fact. So yes, we have plenty of the Numenorian blood playing on this side of the battlefield today. Naru Aru Royal Guard, we have some Numenorian Shield Guard. They'll be useful for their defensive attributes, but they won't actually be as good against Harad. Their own armour will be less useful against Harad's plentiful armour piercing. And their AP, of course, will largely go to waste against Harad. Against the Serpent Guard it'll be okay, but against most of the other stuff, not as useful as it otherwise would be. Numenorian cohorts, on the other hand, are going to be very effective. Their base damage is going to be really good against the lightly armoured, low melee defense denizens of the south. Some Seafarers of Nindamos acting as a supporting line, and then back here, some really high-tier infantry units in the Royal Legion and the Pharazim Swordmasters. Pharazim Nobles out on the flank, and they're going to be moving with some Numenorian steel bows. I don't know how they're necessarily going to do. There's actually some more Haradrim hidden in the trees up there. They are visible, which is interesting, but that cavalry division, Pharazim Nobles are going to be really good against most of the Haradrim cavalry, even against the Mumakil if the Mumakil get bogged out. His closest ally is Captain Gervais. It's the first time I've seen Captain Gervais actually playing in Reforged for quite a while. Normally we see him in Silmarillion more so, but he's here playing as Arthedain. Dunedain Mounted Company, so some more melee cav, riding with the very dangerous Knights of Numenor. Very well-rounded unit of cavalry that. Dunedain Peacekeepers will be pretty useful against more lightly armoured units, Belagire from Umbar and most of the Haradrim roster. Evendim Spearmen are here. Of course, Arthedain largely fighting on home turf, because I believe this map is intended to be somewhere within central Arnor. Evendim Archers. We've got some Arthedain men-at-arms and pikemen forming up a, again, a functional, not spectacular, but a very functional front line, which is very numerous as well. So, numbers-wise, I think Arthedain are going to have the edge over Umbar here, but can they make that pay? They've got a catapult as well, which could be a problem for Windy here, and also some Wardens of the North, and at the very back, some Numenor Gate Guards. Moving over here, I believe this is another Arthedainian army. Indeed it is. Glorious Kazakhstan playing as them. Some Evendim Archers. So most of the time you'd back Arthedain in a skirmish fight against Harad. The Ballista might throw a spanner in the works, but I'm not too sure. These dense formations could be targeted. Some Evendim Spearmen with the first level of armour upgrade there. Nope, there's nothing over there. Some Arthedain pikemen backed up by Dunedain peacekeepers this time, so the pikemen don't have the armour upgrade, but this is a more dangerous front line, given that it is partially made, at the very least, of Dunedain. And then at the back we have some dismounted Fornoster Right Knights. I like the fact that peacekeepers and these dismounted knights are here. The high base damage will be very good against Harad, and some Arthedain marksmen at the back as well. There could very well be a few hidden units as Knights of Numenor, obviously. Arthedain have got plenty of Dunedain class units which can hide under normal circumstances, and given the tree cover, you'd have to assume that will still be the case. And finally, last but by no means least, we have Joris Manioman, who is playing as Dale. Got some Dalian Spearmen on the front line. Like I said, against Angmar you need your front line to be solid, but you need something to deal damage to them quickly. Dale have got plenty of archers to do that. Lake Town Infantry, though, are certainly more of a flash-in-the-pan kind of archer, and then in melee as well, but they are multifaceted nonetheless. Blackshot Dragon Slayers, armour-piercing missiles are going to be important as long as they target down the right things. To be fair, the Dismounted Earls of Dale as a melee combatant should do quite well against a lot of the Angmarim units, as long as they don't get singled out by a lot of the armour-piercing. And the Barding Herd can certainly help with matters, which on pikemen could prove to be an issue, but against most other things Angmar have brought, the Barding Herd should be pretty good, as long as they have the right support in and around them. Dalian Paladins most certainly will, of course, with that AP. Dalian Royal Guard back here as well. And then we also have a force ready to try and push around the body of water over here to flank Dalian Spearmen, Dismounted Earls, and a couple of units of Mounted Earls as well. I mean, they need to be very careful, because they, even with two of them, I wouldn't back them against the Witchram Inquisitors in a fight near the Angmarim lines, but we shall wait and see. I think things are going to get underway pretty quickly here, and I would assume, like I said, we're going to see WK and Sin scrap first, because everyone else has the luxury of really seeing what's what in and amongst the enemy ranks, but Sin and WK really don't have that if they want to try and claim the high ground that is in the middle of the two of them. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So I don't imagine we shall have to wait too long here, and indeed you can already see the arrows streaking over the hill to hit into WK's ranks. I do think WK has got a slight head start on getting up the hill now. I guess it is almost completely even, really. And the Iron Royal Guard may be firing. The artillery starts streaking across the sky as well. So Windy moving forwards into the ranks of Captain Gervais's army here. And also artillery being traded back and forth between Harad and Arthedain over here as well. I would be a little bit careful if I was Glorious Kazakhstan, because as much as the Evendim Archers are pretty much designed to be the sort that you send in front and centre right from the off, they do need a little bit of support, otherwise they are open to attack from various forms of cavalry. At the moment it looks as though Dale are going to hold position, and so too are Angmar. And thus far we're not seeing anything in the way of engagements in melee. Grey Company here, Windy's very substantial archer line is going to be moving forward, and they should do pretty well, as I said, in this sort of situation. Again, Evendim Archers are pretty much designed to get into a skirmish fight like this, but it's still not going to be the best engagement for them. This is going to be a little bit more of a concern, however. I think what we will do actually is... Oh, that wasn't what I was hoping to do at all. Go down to half speed as the Knights of Numenor come charging in, and this is going to be a problem. I mean, they will charge into a portion of the Balaguer archers, but the Balaguer footmen are here to slam the door shut in the cavalry's face. And the charge, I mean, because of how broken up the units are, they actually maybe didn't connect as well as Glorious Kazakhstan was hoping for here, and they may end up losing a couple of riders as well as the Knights try to leave melee with the spears, although no, it looks as though the survivability of the Knights of Numenor will do the job for the time being. I mean, from the looks of things, Windy's taking a decent amount of damage from the catapult, but it's not really anything too substantial in terms of single shots just yet. So that is certainly worth bearing in mind. Meanwhile, the Haradrim are moving forward. They have claimed the top of the hill, interestingly enough, and so Sin, I thought he was going to charge up the hill and try and directly contest things with Harad, but he has decided not to. Instead, he's decided to pull back to high ground, which I guess better meshes with his ally to his right. In so doing, though, this is probably going to be a slower paced fight over on this side than I initially thought it was going to be. WK's little ambush troops up in the trees as well will be not as useful as he was hoping for in that position, because he will have to move them and ultimately reveal them, of course. Right. Upgraded Balaketh marksmen, they are in range of the enemy. But so far, I mean, this isn't going to be too telling for either side. Umbar should end up winning a skirmish fight against the rank and file Arthedain archers, but Arthedain won't care too much about that as long as they don't get rolled over too easily. Meanwhile, Angmar going in for a full assault on Dale, and the Mumakil, as I was kind of fearing, these Evadim archers were very exposed, and the Mumakil will mop them right up. The Grey Company are over here, and they will also be hunted. The Mumakil taking some damage there from the range of fire, but this here is probably going to end up being the most substantial advance now, with the Trolls leading the way as the vanguard, and then the rest of the Angmarim army coming in to attack Dale from the front. Dale do have the terrain advantage, they do have plenty of defensive troops, but like I said, they're going to need their archers to do a fair amount of heavy lifting for them, because this is exactly where Angmar earn their keep. Pushing forward in brute strength fashion, the Witches are exposed. That flanking force from Dale is there, but they are going to bump into the Snaga, who will reveal themselves. I mean, it's not the end of the world, of course. The Earls will try and bludgeon their way through the Snaga, but they will get in the way, and also the Wargs revealing themselves as well mean that the Earls are in a little bit of trouble here. They are getting caught on the sacrificial infantry after all. I don't know if this flanking force, because that means there's going to be infantry that isn't on the front line to try and defend against Angmar's very aggressive tactics here. You can see Barding Herd and Dalian Spearmen on the front line. Like I was mentioning, a pretty good defensive force. Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Part of the problem here as well, actually, is the terrain may be helping Dale from a fatigue perspective, but it's not giving them the easiest of shots with their archers, so Angmar actually being able to benefit somewhat from the enemy having superior terrain to themselves. The Black Serpents are here. The Mumakil have been carved down by the Grey Company and perhaps some of the supporting archers from the rest of the Arthedain lines as well. Still, the Ballista continues to try and deal a little bit of damage here and there to Glorious Kazakhstan's lines. Elsewhere on the line, however, not an awful lot. I mean, it's still, for the most part, just a case of trading back and forth with their archers. Numenor also starting to do that once again with the Narun Aru Royal Guard, who will do very nicely, of course, against the Haradrim forces. But again, it's only little bits of damage here and there, whereas this over here represents a significant moment in the battle. Because if Angmar do start to turn the tide against Dale, it's not going to be enough for the red team, the rest of the red team, to just sit comfortably in their positions on the hills, because Angmar will ultimately be, if Angmar are ultimately victorious, I should say, they will be able to come in from the side against Glorious Kazakhstan's force, which Lango can then move forward, and it will be like dominoes falling, really, one after the other. Of course, it's a very different story if Dale end up winning, but I find that somewhat difficult to believe when their force is a little bit scattered. And also, Lango's Black Serpents are over here offering some good support, getting some nice cycle charges in here, the sort of thing which Dale can scarcely afford. I mean, Athala Rangers, I presume, haven't used up their ammunition yet, and they're being caught in melee. Keldon River Patrol are very weak melee combatants. They're not going to stand a chance against Gundabad Guard. And the Earls of Dale, as much as of a decent infantry unit as they are, this is simply too much of a task here. And as I was mentioning, the Dalian archers not really able to get into the best of positions. There are some trolls in and amongst the trees as well, making a nuisance of themselves. Lake Town infantry in place. Witchhelm Inquisitors are in behind enemy lines, taking damage from archers from behind, which they may end up losing a lot of their number here, but that doesn't really matter. They can deal with that cavalry quite nicely. Earls of Dale are routing. They try to get a rear charge off, but with pikes and halberds on the front line, that's always going to be a little bit of a concern. Orc skirmishers, what about here in the backfield? Dale look as though they are going to be, well, I mean, they will be victorious over here. A unit of Earls and a unit of Dalian Spearmen should be more than enough to deal with these Snaga, even though the Snaga do have the advantage in elevation terms. Earls should be fine. It says for the moment victory seems certain for the Snaga, but that should flick around once more. Earls are running away. Harad sending over more and more support over here, and that means it is kind of incumbent if you see that as Glorious Kazakhstan to move forward and put some pressure on the front lines over here. Because if you just leave it as it is now, Harad's presence supporting Angmar is only going to hasten their victory. There are paladins here on the front line, and they will do very nicely against stuff like Guardians of Khan Doom that you can see struggling against them. Blackshot Dragon Slayers charging into melee, which is a sign of the times. Dalian Royal Guard are still back there, but the Black Serpents are still very, very healthy, and they've proven to be a real nuisance so far, and this is going to be a pretty nasty downhill charge. These units are already shaken, the line is pretty thin, and this could be where the dam bursts, so to speak. As the Haradrim fast movers do get a charge in there again, there's going to be a gap in the line now, so if Angmar so choose, they can try and push through it. This is where the hill may come to their aid. What's going on back there? There's something being grilled. It's the Witches. You can see the green smoke rising, going after the Dalian Royal Guards. Yeah, Dale are in massive trouble here. They're taking a real beating. And support is going to be needed. The Grey Company coming alongside to rip through the line would have been good if it had happened earlier on, but with Warg Skirmishers now completely alerted to their presence, things are looking pretty grim for them. Having a look back over here, is the ballista still firing? No, it doesn't look like it. Yes, it is actually. It says it's still firing, but there's no movement from the crew. Glorious Kazakhstan took up a rather similar defensive position actually, sort of on a small hill, very densely packed as Dale did, so may end up suffering the same kind of fate really, as Dale continues to put up a brave resistance here. But you can see that the Dalian infantry is simply losing ground, and the unrelenting Angmarin will push through these lines. Lake Town infantry also exposed. I mean, Windy did also push forward a little bit further than his allies to try and get in range with his archers. Artillery doing their thing. It's going after, by the looks of things, the Warlords of Umbar, some Southron Lancers making their way across from WK. Will they hit? No, they will not. Archerondas Faithful pulling back as well, but for the time being it's still a skirmish fight over here, which is not too surprising given the aggressor in this situation were Umbar, and they did go for a heavy archer style build. Still the artillery trying to make an impression. There's Dunedin Mounted Company over here. Numenor still biding their time and waiting as well. I'm a little bit surprised actually that some members of the red team haven't tried to take matters into their own hands and do something at this point, because I mean, I know we're at half speed and we're still relatively early on in the fight, but looking over to this side of the battlefield and seeing this transpiring, I guess you can try and go ultra defensive as the red team at this point, but in order to do that you need to form up a unified front. And while Captain Gervais and Sin have got their armies somewhat linked, Glorious Kazakhstan is still somewhat isolated, so the same fate could befall him, as I said, that has befallen Dale over here. Cavalry completely gone over on this side now. In the backfield, Snaga slowly but surely being put to the sword, but there's so many of them that it's actually taking Dale a while to get through, and actually the Earls are taking casualties as a result. I don't know if there has been any cavalry action going on over here, but I would doubt it. We would have seen what's going on over here. Southron Lancers are over here trying to do their thing. A few Warns of the North actually dying as a result of these Southron Lancer charges, but nothing too severe. They will almost certainly still have some ammunition. What remains of these Knights of Adumas, will they be overrun by this many Southron Lancers? I don't know. Southron Lancers are not very good in melee against other cavalry. Knights of Adumas are fantastic, so I still think even with that numbers advantage they would still struggle. Then they can leave, and this unit of Knights of Adumas, while still a danger, is not the all-conquering force that could have been earlier on. Grey Company and is now being chased away by Witch Realm Inquisitors. Warg Skirmishers are very depleted, but their job is done supporting the Angmarin push. Still some Dalian Paladins left alive, not too surprising. By far and away Dale's best unit for dealing with Angmar like this, and where Angmar were starting to look a little bit thin on the ground, Lango has sent over some support in the form of some Luhard Berserkers to make sure that the overwhelming force moniker still applies. The Daily Royal Guard are also a very good combatant in melee, but in much the same way as pretty much all of Dale's other offerings so far. They have just been overrun as Angmar continue to push forward in the way that they do. Having a look at the losses on the front line, I mean, it's not that catastrophic for Angmar by the looks of things. They have taken losses, to be sure, but this is definitely a margin of victory they would accept. We have over here, we have got some Southron Lancers again being pushed forward aggressively by WK. I think this is probably going to be the end of them though, with the Abingdon Spearmen lurching forward to deal with them. And they do rout. Dunedain Mounted Company will make sure that they do not return. Then again, there's also the Umbar firing lines over there, so will the Dunedain Mounted Company continue to charge forwards? They're only sword cavalry, let's not forget, so they're not going to be that devastating, but they could try and charge into some exposed archers on the front. Interesting enough, still WK's infantry biding their time and waiting. I mean, having a look over here, Captain Gervais, plenty of units still standing, not a huge amount of damage sustained in spite of the consistent arrow fire that Umbar has put them under. Meanwhile, Grey Company retreating back behind the Arthedain marksman. Glorious Kazakhstan moving forward a little bit more, but actually if he approaches from this side, Windy has got the terrain advantage. And I don't think now is the time you want to be pushing forward, actually. I think that ship has sailed. You need to be thinking about fortifying your position, because if you do not, you are going to find yourself caught between the defensive position ultimately of Lango and being flanked then by what remains of Angmar. And that is not something Arthedain would survive. Artillery streaking through the sky in the background there. Still the Daily Royal Guard fighting back to back, but they'll almost certainly rout pretty soon. I mean, there's no real sense in routing there. May as well fight to the bitter end. Over here, Dale ultimately victorious eventually against the Snaga, so he still has a presence here in the backfield, but it's nothing too substantial. He might actually be better off hoping that the enemy forget about it and then he can deploy them a little bit later on. Dale's general force. Artillery. They're going after the Mumakil? Possibly. I mean, when you hit the Mumakil, of course, they will die instantly. What do we have here? Numenor moving forward. Again, I'm a little bit surprised that he's waited for Dale's ultimate defeat to do this. Sin, but it's better late than never, I suppose. I mean, Numenor and cohort, like I said, Harad versus Numenor is another interesting matchup, because technically speaking they've got a lot of stuff which should be good against one another from an infantry standpoint. Harad very obviously with their armour piercing, but Numenor as well with their base damage on their infantry being very, very impressive. Harad's lack of melee defense and armour means they will fall in droves to Numenor's strong infantry units. So it's really going to be a case of who can withstand this kind of punishment better. Numenorian Shield Guard may not be quite as effective, but I mean they're still going to be better as an infantry unit goes than something like Southron Warband. Both armour-piercing spears, but both are very different levels of quality. In amongst the trees, Numenorian cohort engaging with the first line of Southron. Southron pikemen, we very rarely see them be that effective actually, but this is a situation where maybe they can, as they will amble forwards and help support the spear line which WK has laid on. Numenor going to try and do the business here. Black Serpent's getting in behind enemy lines, and this is going to be pretty painful for these archers that have been exposed. Then this is the beauty of having a unit like the Black Serpents. They're so swift and going after the Arthedain shadow bows. The charge actually missing there as a result of the unit moving away from them, which is unfortunate, but they're still going to be hunted down by the Black Serpents, I would imagine. Champions of Nafrat are going to carve their way through Numenorian Shield Guard with reckless abandon. Let's go down to half speed again, just momentarily. So for the time being, Harad will probably be pretty pleased with this, but it really just depends on if the second wave of Numenor can help shatter Harad's defences. There are Pharazim Swordmasters, the Numenorian cohort moving forward, unupgraded dismounted Serpent Guard. I mean, they're fine as an infantry unit goes. Muhard Beast Hunters routing. So in parts the Harad line's doing quite well, but in other parts Numenor's aggressive push is yielding the kind of results that they would want to see. So we're seeing already a very chaotic fight now. Angmar will probably end up moving forward pretty swiftly to support the renewed Harad assault on Arthedain over here. Emendim archers being exposed by trollmen, so they're going to die really very quickly. Not many Grey Company left alive. The Serpent's Fangs, poison projectiles could be really useful actually. The rank and file of Arthedain are most certainly not immune to routing. Arthedain marksmen trying to do some good damage. I mean, again, when you attack as Harad, taking damage from missiles is one of your primary concerns. Not many of your units are built for withstanding that kind of damage. Javelins raining down on the supporting archers for Arthedain as the Emendim spearmen desperately try to hold this front line against all of these Southrons. And that leaves really this force in the middle. Umbar's infantry now moving forward as well. Balakith's shield bearers with their armour piercing should do very nicely against these Emendim spearmen. Those maces will be doing a good job. There's still a few of these units which maybe are a little bit too far away from my liking from Windy. Those reinforcements, I mean, at this point, throwing everything up front and making sure that your lines stay solid after the fairly long period of skirmishing that Umbar were involved in would probably be the way to go. Especially seeing as if something like the Knights of Numenor do get into the backfield, the gap between your units means they can really exploit that, so that is something to watch out for as the Knights continue to try and cut their way through. Nara and Iron Roarguard are also behind enemy lines here, so the kind of stretch nature, he's moving his infantry forward now, which is good to see. Some shield bearers in reserve. There's still cavalry running around. Again, it's difficult to keep track of all the cavalry units, but so many of them can be so decisive in this sort of situation. I mean, Pharaohs and Nobles have already taken a lot of damage from something. Dismounted Serpent Guard fighting their hardest, but the Numenorian cohort on their own would be superior to them, let alone when they have the backing of a unit as all-conquering as the Pharazim Swordmasters. Elsewhere along the front, Southron Warband, Southron units in general doing their best, but despite the initial worries, now that all of Numenor's infantry has been mobilised, it's looking more and more like their quality is going to pay dividends. Where are those Mumakil? They're moving forward now. We'll keep an eye on them in just a moment as they make their way through the trees. Over here on this side, Harad continuing to do their thing. Arthedain shadow bows in range, having shaken off the Black Serpents. WK losing micro on them, and as a result, Numenorian steel bows cutting them down. Speaking of which, Seafarers and more steel bows converging on their location as well. They're still winning on this side, Harad, but in the middle things are looking a little bit dicier. Champions of Nathrak coming in. They'll be pretty good against the Royal Legion of Armanelos. Such is the way of things. With armour-piercing infantry, the Mumakil are moving in, so we'll see if their fate is any more positive for the blue team than Lango's Mumakil, which ultimately was a nuisance, but ended up getting cut down by Grey Company fairly quickly. If they can keep moving, things should be okay. As the Knights of Anumnus move forward, the archers on the towers that are on the Mumakil's back will do little bits of damage here and there as well. Umbar, have they got enough of a force on this front line to worry the classic pike and infantry formations that Arthedain often roll with? Fighting from the front like this, I'm not so sure. The pikes are in a good place to repulse this attack. Nara and Iro Sentinels are over here, however, and perhaps driving a wedge between glorious Kazakhstan and his two allies is the way to go. There's still some Dalian units back here, which is neat to see. But I would still worry about this over here. I'm actually surprised that Angmar have not moved forward a little bit more quickly. If they did, with Lango, a two-pronged assault with Lango, then that would have yielded some good results. And already there is like the threat of Umbar cutting off this army here. That would be one way to approach the situation, I think. Grey Company continuing to shoot their shots as well. At what? I'm not so sure. They don't have the best angle, regardless of what they're shooting at, having to go over the hill in that manner. Pikes pointing the wrong way. A classic problem. Turning their backs to trollmen is definitely not what they would have been hoping for. Angmar moving forward now. Balakith Axeguard as well from Umbar. So this is something I think which the blue team has been slightly better at than the red team in terms of sending over little bits of support here and there to help engagements where things are either going poorly or well for them to try and hammer home an advantage. And Balakith Axeguard coming over to help out in Harad's efforts against this Arthedain position is good, although they are already shaken as a result of positioning, and Dunedain Peacekeepers will do quite nicely. And obviously this does mean that this is a unit of Axemen, which ultimately is not being utilised to help out against Gervais's Arthedain force. Valak's shield bearers doing their best, and our Irish Sentinels as well, but getting overrun by the sheer amount of rank and file units that Arthedain have. Better front line now, perhaps from Umbar, but still the pikes will hold them in place. You can see over here only one of the Mumakil remains. Defeat is almost a certainty. 0 of the Mumakil remains, in fact. Poison projectiles being used. Royal Legion of Armenlo still standing despite their brush with the champions of Nathra. That is something they will be extremely pleased with. Elsewhere, Seafarers of Nindamos and the Arthedain Shadowbows ripping through the South Front pikemen and trying to get behind enemy lines. Muhad Beast Hunters being utilised as infantry in much the same way that these steel bows now are. Pharazim Nobles still alive, only 10 of them, but as the battle wears on, even these more depleted cavalry units can become more and more decisive. So they go back up the hill. Steel bows going back that way. I mean, there's so much tree cover over here that it can be a little bit difficult to see the overall organisation of this line, but you can see that Numenor have pierced the Haradrim positions in several places, and they are now starting to envelop what remains of the Haradrim lines as the Numenorian cohort charges through the trees. Trollmen are still here, and they'll do quite nicely against Numenorian infantry, but not when the odds are this far against them. Another unit of Trollmen fighting alongside the Serpent Guard, but with Pharazim Swordmasters to deal with, this is a tricky situation, to say the least. As we go back down the lines, well, actually the Numenor General there falling. Their morale is such they should still be okay, but still, unfortunate. The Arthedain pipelines continue to hold against the Umbar advance, and there are a few instances of infantry getting behind lines, but Dale immediately routing. I don't know, I mean, it's a very evenly matched fight, this, between Gervais and Windy in terms of the frontline engagement. Well, there goes the Arthedain General of glorious Kazakhstan, which is probably not a great sign for them, and I think a large part of it is down to Angmar starting to push in from the side as well to join with Lango's assault. There's Troll Slayers here, but they're getting surrounded on all sides. Oof, and that's brutal as well. Demons of the Desert carving through them, knocking them over in the process. Dunedain Troll Slayers are here in the backfield alongside Grey Company. I mean, perhaps the Troll Slayers took a little bit too long to play their hand here, but I don't know, I mean, these Angmarin forces that are back here will find themselves getting mopped up pretty quickly by the axes of those Troll Slayers. A few Witches still alive, but they've already used up a few volleys, which probably means they don't have that much ammo, if any ammo, left for them. Serpent's Fangs mucking in melee, as they are wont to do, but yes, it looks as though Harad will be victorious over here. Oof, narrowly missing there, the Trollman. Still some artillery then that Captain Gervais has got to work with. But yeah, it's really just going to be clean-up duty, which was always going to be likely when Angmar arrived to support the main Harad push. And of course this means we're already seeing Lango start to shift his focus a little bit more to help out Windy's attack on Captain Gervais, and this is kind of what I was fearing from the blue team's perspective when they basically sat on their hills and watched as Dale perished. It's all well and good if Dale go down swinging and do terminal damage to Angmar and perhaps another faction who sends over support, but that wasn't the case. And they may end up paying the price for their slowness to react, or unwillingness to react maybe, unless Numenor can put on a suitably dominant performance against WK's Harad force and then come in from the side as these Arthedain pipelines continue to hold up. There are some Umbar forces heading over here as well to almost preempt that a little bit. Dunedain Rangers from Captain Gervais. Is there anything left over here of Harad? Not much. They're still fighting, which at this point for WK, I think it's pretty much guaranteed he is going to lose against this Numenorian offensive, but he just needs to stay standing for as long as he can. Umbar General getting bisected by a Troll Slayer there. Umbar's morale for the most part is okay, especially with their higher tier units. We've already seen even their Balakith units can end up routing, and that is where a lot of Windy's focus is in terms of his mainline units. The Belagar units most certainly as well are capable of routing, as the Arthedain pikes continue to do their job. Windy, again, perhaps all he needs to do is hold his position and allow Lango's Harad army, and ultimately, once again, Eclipse's Angmar force will follow through as well. Numenor Skate Guards, Wardens of the North, facing off against the Demons of the Desert, and this is a fight the Wardens of the North should win, and are winning. Demons are not weak in melee by any means, but the Wardens of the North are pretty much ideally suited for facing a unit such as this, with their long swords in hand. Those Dalian units that were victorious in the back, revealing themselves once more. But Lake Town Infantry isn't going to be the kind of unit that they would want to bring to the party in the late game. Or has Kazakhstan got anything left on this hill? There is still combat taking place, and it is Dunedain Troll Slayers. 79 of them. Maybe actually this is something which they can't afford to take too lightly. I mean, with Hammer Guard here they should still be fine, as well as a few other supporting units. Still Grey Company as well, so Witches could... I mean, I'm not sure I'd actually take that shot, because it will streak through the Troll Slayers and hit your own units, and you want those Hammer Guard swinging in the late game, if you are able. Defeat is a distinct possibility for these Troll Slayers. So things are not quite as cut and dry as perhaps you would expect. Harbingers of Castamere coming in to try and support the Demons of the Desert. This will change matters somewhat. Harbingers should be able to defeat Wardens of the North in melee. They are a dedicated unit of heavy swordsmen after all, but we shall see. Meanwhile, the organised front lines of Arthedain changing somewhat now. A lot of WK's units coming back down here. Lango also making his way across over here, so rather than going sequentially, they are going to try and, at the very least, address the Numenor problem now with something. Trollman of Harad, I'm sure Sin is sick of the sight of Trollman at this point. One of the most awkward opponents Numenor can hope to face in melee after all. And they will cut their way through Seafarers of Niendamos with impunity. And with all that support, as long as that Arthedain pike line was able to hold up, pretty quickly it was dissolved here as a result of support being forthcoming from Harad. And like I said, that interplay between the blue team I think has been slightly better than that of the red teams. Balakith Axe Guard. 35 of them remaining. And there goes the Angmar General at the hands of those Troll Slayers. Basic Angmar Orcs may be worrying themselves. I mean, the Wardens of the North actually very dominant in this fight against the Harbingers of Castamere. I can't help but feel as though the Harbingers maybe have seen more combat as a result of that. There's also Grey Company though, which may be skewing the result of that fight somewhat, even with only 5 of them. They're also firing into this blob now. Sending a unit of Axemen over to try and chase them off, but could definitely be a nuisance. Larger Marchers returning. Serpent's Fangs moving forward. There's still 21 Royal Legion of Armenelos in there. Plenty of the heavy Numenorian infantry. Windy still has a decent amount of pikes though. Late game pikes, even basic ones such as this, can be a real conundrum to solve. And they're going to have to flank here, and I'm not sure Numenor are going to have the luxury of spreading themselves too thin. There goes another general. Whose might that be? I think that is probably Captain Gervais's, his Wardens of the North. Under a decent amount of pressure. Arthedain Shield Guard are there. Does WK have anything left over here? I would assume not. This hill was the site of a large battle in the end. It just wasn't as quick as I was expecting it to be. Dunedain Rangers claiming this ground. Well, they actually do get around to the flank of these pikes, but Windy's attention was probably focused elsewhere initially. So we go back down the engagements as they happen. Champions of Nafrat from Lango, 36 of them. Glorious Kazakhstan's Dunedain Troll Slayers and Dunedain Rangers. So he still had some strength left in reserve, and perhaps they did leave him alone a little bit too soon, but I'm not sure whether that's going to be a terminal problem or not. Captain Gervais still has his Wardens of the North, has routing Balakith Axe Guard, and this now is probably the bastion of hope for the red team. Those of Numenorian blood. Windy sending in his Balakith marksmen to try and somewhat surround them, get a little bit more efficiency in terms of kills, but very quickly the Balakith marksmen will find themselves on the wrong end of an engagement against Troll Slayers. Cavalry still flitting around as well, Black Serpents, which have proven to be pretty effective in this battle as well. 35 Nairn Aru's Sentinels are a strong unit to have in the late game as well. High tier pikes, of course. Do those Rangers still have ammunition? They've got their swords drawn, so perhaps not. Ones of the North trying to get out of here, trying to avoid being poked to death by the pikes, as the Troll Slayers continue to try and trade blows with what remains of those champions of Neferat. A difficult fight to be sure. The bigger fight is happening over here. Will Numenor have enough left in the tank? I mean, there's routing here, mass routing from a lot of these more basic units, and maybe this is working out in their favour. Maybe Numenor have the quality to continue to do this sort of thing. Still more Trollmen to have to deal with. Serpent's Fangs are no slouches in melee, but with Ranger ammunition forthcoming, and with the fact that the Pharazim Swordmasters and Royal Legion are fighting side by side, maybe they can make this work. This is a very close battle, isn't it? Dunedain Rangers, Arthedain Shadowbows. Pikes are fighting to the death. There's one Pharazim Noble left, but he can make a nuisance of himself most certainly. There's no way these Southron pikemen don't rout when they're under this kind of pressure. And maybe not having a more organised approach of sequentially killing off the red team armies is going to bite them here. Instead, trying to spread themselves too thin, it's going to result in them not having quite enough to kill off Numenor and Arthedain in all cases as well. But there's still every chance that maybe they do run out of steam, which on Hammerguard there's only 7 of them remaining after their brush with the Troll Slayers from before, and Wards of the North and the Troll Slayers have proven themselves to be absolutely vicious melee combatants in this fight, taking on dedicated infantry and getting the better end of these engagements. Dunedain Rangers may be out of ammunition. There's still 6 champions of Neferat against 6 Wardens of the North. Interesting fight. I think it's going to come down to who's more wounded. Also, the general is still alive in this unit, and of course we know that individually they're stronger, so maybe. Glorious Kazakhstan's Rangers do still have a bit of ammunition as well. Dale is still alive in the battle, with 7 Earls, 19 Lake Town Infantry are running away. Now, an Aru Sentinels will be enough to kill these guys off eventually, but they're taking Ranger fire. I don't know, I think we might be seeing a good team victory here, actually. I mean, Numenor are going to be victorious over here, and they're going to have units of genuine quality left alive. There goes the Haradrim General. Haradrim Archers coming back, but again, that's not exactly the kind of unit you need to be turning things around at this point. It's been an interesting fight, this. In spite of the blue team being more willing to assist one another, ultimately I think the choice to spread themselves too thin and not go after them in sequence, even if it was just going after Glorious Kazakhstan and completely destroying him first and foremost, before then moving on to Captain Gervais and Sid, who were more unified than their allies, to be fair. That would have been the better way of doing things. They kind of did that, the blue team. They didn't go all in on that. They allowed Glorious Kazakhstan to somewhat survive, and that may be a decision they come to regret. There's 1 Hammer Guardsman left. The Earls are routing. There's not much in the way of Arthedain forces left now. There's still 2 Black Serpents who are going to be enough to continue to flatten those Dunedain Rangers who are trying to point blank these Sentinels, which is pretty much what the blue team are going to be putting their faith in at this point. They'll regroup around this unit of high tier pikes and hope that that will be enough, but they're going to need to make sure the pikes can't get flanked, and I'm not sure that's going to be all that possible with what Numenor have left. Haradrim Archers running, but they're actually not going to be able to get away from the... yeah, they rout as a result of being touched, basically, by the steel bows, and one of them gets killed. Possibly more than one if that fight continues, but what do we have? Numenorian cohort, 10 Swordmasters, 15 Royal Legion, Shadowbows cohort. They're going to have enough, I think, to be able to get in and around the Sentinels, which I think is the key. There's still 21 Rangers back over here as well, who are continuing to get chased by, I assume that one... Oh no, there's some Serpent's Fangs back here. This is actually WK's general by the looks of things, and the Black Serpents will be able to finish this off. I mean, I think the red team will go on to win here just because of the strength at arms that Numenor still have left, but I've been wrong before in this battle. There's every chance that that could not be the case. I mean, these Rangers are probably going to get charged into oblivion here. Serpent's Fangs continuing to nibble away at them in melee as well. Right, what do we have? I mean, if you're Numenor here, what you really need to do is just charge in and just get in and around the Iron Iron Sentinels. I don't really think the Southron Warband will last all that long. I think they'll rout pretty quickly, and that will leave the pikes very exposed, I should say. They're already very depleted. Shadowbows, I think, cutting down a unit that was routing and running all over the field. Steel bows moving forward. Such a close battle. Within 1%. It says more of the red team have been killed, but I would assume that also more of the blue team have ended up routing, as is often the way with the evil factions. Is this general going to be enough to kill off what remains of the Dunedain Rangers? Kind of needs to be, from the perspective of the blue team. A battle for the ages, which we will return to momentarily, but this is going to be the decisive engagement, I fear. And just getting even a unit of steel bows in and around the front line will be enough here. Even if they continue to fight from the front, I don't think there's enough pikes to necessarily withstand Numenor here, especially if they still have ammunition, which they have their bows drawn, those steel bows. So. And there goes the general as well, which means those Rangers will be able to get into melee. There may only be 8 of them, but it's another little thing which is going to hasten the victory here of the forces of good. Are they going to point blank them? They are. They do still have ammunition, so this is going to be an unceremonious end for the Umbar and Harad troops that continue to fight. Not quite as devastating as I was fearing, actually, that, but it's enough to rout the Southron Warband. Like I said, I didn't expect them to last too long in melee, and indeed they do end up routing. The Iron Sentinels, as one of the high tier units for Umbar, has got locked morale, so they will fight to the bitter end, but that won't take too long, I fear. What's going on there? Peeling off the front line. 4 of them remain. Very quickly, even high tier pikes, when their formation is buckled like this, will die off pretty quickly because of their relatively low melee stats. And there we go. Victory. Technically speaking, the team that lost has actually lost less of their force overall, but again, they had far more routing. And that was interesting, a real game of twists and turns. Sin, when he did finally move forwards, was able to defeat WK's Harad force rather nicely, and that made up for Dale's fate on the other side, and maybe not quite quick enough for Angmar to support the assault into Glorious Kazakhstan's Arthedain army. They didn't finish Glorious Kazakhstan off completely, at least initially, and that proved to be a bit of a mistake, given the fact that among that number was Rangers and Troll Slayers. Captain Gervais was more in sync with one of his allies in Sin than the other red team players were, but there you have it. It's a rather interesting battle there, in the sense that I think in terms of teamwork, actually, the blue team probably did better. It's just a case of execution, ultimately, and then organisation and defensive qualities were enough to see the red team over the line, and ultimately, of course, that the Numenor quality as well was something which I said earlier on, that Harad and Numenor are pretty good against one another, and on this occasion it seems like the base damage of Numenor was good enough to overcome the fact that they were taking a lot of AP damage in response. So, let's see what did the damage for the Angmarim army, which our Hammer Guard did quite well. 147 kills, seeing as they were mostly committed later on when the battle was actually starting to turn a little bit sour for the blue team. Trolls were in the initial assault against Dale, of course they did quite well, but then they fizzled out, as Trolls often do. Guardians of Khan Doom, some of them, well, one of them getting 156, which is markedly more than the others, but then Guardians are one of those units which you just send onto the front line really to be that bulwark. Halberds doing quite nicely. Said earlier on that Halberds, as long as they engage against the right force, despite being relatively weak and low tier, the armor piercing can still be really good. And you know, most of them getting quite good kill counts there, 17 for one of them, but still. Gundabad Guard and Snaga Stalkers also there as well. I mean, Snaga Stalkers not doing too badly, given that they were more of a rear guard. They ultimately ended up losing, but I think that they were definitely cost effective back there. But yes, a good victory that for the red team. Big thank you to Eclipse for sending this one to me, and we'll be seeing at least one more from him in the coming couple of weeks. Maybe another one if he can get that Arthedain Ruins battle that he was running to work. So we may be seeing a little bit more of that as we move into the month of May, which of course we'll also see at some point in May a live stream, I hope, unless I get sent away for an extended period, in which case it will probably have to wait until June, but that will be okay as well. I mean, it is what it is. That will be forthcoming. Hopefully by then as well I will have my new hardware, which maybe means I can go back and see if the Moria battle replays actually do work on my new hardware, which they should do. It'll be an interesting litmus test of it, won't it? Outside of that, also got a few Silmarillion battle replays on the way, 3 of them, which will be showcasing the new faction that have been added there, the Naugrim, aka the Dwarves, which have been talked about for a little while, so that should be quite interesting to see as well. Outside of that, it's really just a case of it is going to continue as it is. We've got Reforged replays, we've got Silmarillion replays. Live stream will happen soon as more of a channel update thing. I might combine that with doing something else, like playing a couple of smaller battles if I can, but again, scheduling is kind of tricky, given the situation is what it is for me at the moment, which, you know, alluded to that in the regular channel update that I did about a week ago after this replay will probably release at this point. But yes, still not entirely sure what's happening at the time of recording this, but very, very soon I should have a slightly better idea about what's going to be going down. And yeah, it is what it is. Anyway, big thank you to Eclipse once again. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.